For generations, the world has remained spellbound by the life and legacy of Princess Diana. Her warmth, elegance, and extraordinary ability to connect with ordinary people made her something the royal family had rarely seen before. But beneath the public image was something far more precious, a mother whose entire world revolved around her children. Now, after years of remaining hidden from public view, a deeply personal letter written by Diana to her eldest son, Prince William, has finally emerged. What truths did she want him to carry? Stay with us as we reveal what was inside Princess Diana's lost letter to Prince William and the secrets it brings to light. Diana's personal letters. It started quietly, almost without fanfare, in the catalog of a London auction house in July 2004. No major headlines, no major press conferences, just a simple listing of handwritten correspondence from the late Princess of Wales. But these were no ordinary letters. They offered something extraordinarily rare, an unfiltered, deeply human look into Diana's most private thoughts. One letter in particular immediately captured attention. It spoke of her eldest son, Prince William, with a tenderness that left little doubt about just how central he was to her entire existence. The auction, organized by a specialist house, featured Diana's personal correspondence with Violet Collison, a woman who was far more than household staff to the Spencer family. She had served as a trusted confidant across decades, witnessing Diana's remarkable journey from a quiet, reserved young girl into the most recognized woman on the planet. These letters mirrored every chapter of that transformation. What set them apart from official palace records, typically polished and carefully managed, was their rawness. These were real emotions on paper. They captured the turbulence of Diana's inner life, her struggles against suffocating royal expectations, the overwhelming whirlwind of planning a wedding broadcast to hundreds of millions, and above everything else, the profound joys and quiet heartaches of being a mother. One particularly delightful letter, dated July 8, 1981, written just weeks before her marriage to Prince Charles, painted a vivid picture of a young bride-to-be swept up in a last-minute frenzy. Yet, despite the chaos surrounding her, Diana's tone was playful and light. She wrote of everyone rushing about with preparations while she herself remained composed. That small detail revealed exactly the kind of warm, grounded personality that would go on to capture the hearts of millions. As the years moved forward, however, her letters shifted in tone. The breezy excitement of a young princess gradually gave way to something heavier, deeper emotions, quiet frustrations, and above all else, a fierce and unshakable devotion to her two boys. What made this collection so remarkable wasn't simply the words on the page, it was everything beneath them. They showed a mother in constant motion, always thinking ahead, always concerned about her children's happiness, their well-being, and the world they would one day inherit. The public had watched Diana through carefully selected photographs, televised documentaries, and landmark interviews, but these letters were something entirely different. They were never meant for anyone else's eyes. They were quiet, intimate, and completely sincere, proof of how desperately she wanted her sons to grow up rooted in kindness and genuine compassion, qualities that the institution of the monarchy did not always make it easy to hold on to. One letter that particularly stands out was dated June 21, 1989, written on official Kensington Palace stationery and addressed to Sergeant George Plum of the Special Escort Group. In it, Diana thanked him warmly for organizing a motorbike display arranged in honor of Prince William's 7th birthday. Her gratitude was genuine and overflowing. She described the joy the display had brought to not just William, but every child present that day. What elevated this letter beyond a simple thank you note was what appeared alongside Diana's signature, the eager, unsteady scribbles of both William and Harry. It was an unguarded, joyful family moment entirely removed from the relentless glare of the press. For those who had followed Diana's story closely, these letters reignited long-held conversations about her complicated relationship with the royal institution and her absolute determination to raise her sons on different terms. Where previous generations of royals had raised their children through formal distance and rigid protocol, Diana dismantled that approach entirely. She wanted William and Harry to have a real childhood, filled with genuine experiences that connected them to the wider world. Her former royal protection officer, Ken Worf, later described how deliberately Diana planned these efforts. She took them to theme parks, introduced them to fast food restaurants, and even navigated public transit with them, not for the cameras, but because she genuinely believed it mattered. She was raising future leaders, and she wanted them to understand the lives of the people they would one day serve. Diana's protection for her children. Diana was never simply a figurehead. She was an active, present, deeply engaged mother who believed her sons deserved a life that extended well beyond the palace's gilded walls. Despite their extraordinary circumstances, she was committed to ensuring they understood what everyday life looked, felt, and smelled like. She arranged outings specifically designed to place William and Harry in ordinary situations alongside ordinary people. And yet she was equally fierce in her protectiveness. She understood better than almost anyone what prolonged media exposure could do to a person because she had lived through it herself. To manage this tension, Diana worked carefully with palace officials to schedule controlled photo opportunities. First days of school, holiday moments, carefully selected family snapshots. These gave the press just enough access to satisfy public curiosity. In return, she asked for boundaries, working tirelessly to carve out spaces where her sons could simply be children. Andrew Morton, in his landmark biography, laid bare how much Diana wrestled with this intrusion. She had endured the media's intensity at its most relentless and was determined that her children would not be consumed by it the way she had been. So her letters about William, therefore, were never casual correspondence. They were records of a mother's love, evidence of her constant effort to prepare him for an extraordinary future while protecting him from its most brutal dimensions. By the time these letters resurfaced at auction in 2004, William was a young man at university. Reading them in that context was quietly powerful. Here was the blueprint of who he had become, written in his mother's own hand years before the world would come to know him as an adult. The letters arrived just 7 years after her death, at a moment when the monarchy was still recalibrating in her wake, and when William's growing public presence made many see in him the clearest living reflection of everything Diana had stood for. But these weren't simply historical artifacts to be cataloged and stored away. They were a profound reminder of what the world had lost. Diana never witnessed her sons reach adulthood. She never saw them build families of their own or take up causes she would have championed alongside them. Yet through these handwritten pages, her voice carried forward, not in formal speeches or choreographed appearances, but in her own words, warm and completely unguarded. What had begun as an auction listing became something far more significant. The letters gave people a chance to feel Diana's presence once more, and they confirmed, in ways no official document ever could, the depth of her love for William. Diana's parenting style. On June 21, 1982, at just 20 years old, Diana became a mother for the first time. Prince William's arrival did not simply add a new role to her life, it fundamentally reorganized her entire sense of purpose. Motherhood wasn't something she stepped into gradually. She embraced it with absolute commitment from the very first moment. Where the royal tradition had long maintained a formal distance between parents and children, with nannies, tutors, and household staff filling most of the daily parenting role, Diana rejected that model entirely. She wanted to be present, not ceremonial. She chose to breastfeed William, a decision that raised eyebrows in royal circles where such practices had long since fallen out of custom. She selected his name herself rather than deferring to palace convention, and she made clear from the outset that no hired staff would replace her as the primary emotional presence in her children's lives. Her conviction was tested almost immediately. Just weeks after William's birth, Prince Charles was required to travel to Australia for official engagements. Royal tradition would have meant leaving the newborn behind in the care of household staff. Diana refused. She brought William with her, making her position unmistakably clear. No obligation, however official, would come before her child. As William grew older, Diana continued to push back against tradition in quiet but significant ways. Rather than arranging private tutors to educate him within the palace, as had been done for generations of royal children before him, she enrolled him in a local nursery school near Kensington Palace. Staff and other parents regularly found themselves surprised to see the Princess of Wales personally arriving for drop-off and collection, just like any other parent. It was a small act, but symbolically, it was quietly revolutionary. Her efforts to ground her sons in real-world experience extended far beyond school runs. She introduced them to fast food restaurants and let them experience the London Underground. She arranged visits to theme parks and ensured they spent time around people who addressed them without formal titles or ceremony. None of this was accidental. According to Ken Worf, Diana planned these excursions carefully, timing them to avoid crowds, scaling back security where possible, occasionally wearing understated clothing to move without drawing attention. These weren't simply outings, they were lessons. Diana was methodically building in her boys a capacity for empathy, an ability to see and understand lives very different from their own. That intention became most visible when she brought William to visit Centrepoint, a London charity dedicated to supporting young people experiencing homelessness. There, William met teenagers his own age who had grown up without the security of family, education, or a stable home. Diana wasn't simply exposing him to hardship, she was teaching him responsibility. She wanted him to understand from as early an age as possible that privilege carried with it an obligation to others. The unbreakable bond between Diana, William, and Harry. As the early 1990s arrived, Diana's marriage was visibly deteriorating. The speculation, the media pressure, the internal tensions of royal life, all of it played out under relentless public scrutiny. Yet, through every difficult chapter, Diana found her anchor in William and Harry. They were the constant. Everything else could shift, but her devotion to them never did. She approached their schooling with great deliberateness, choosing Wetherby School and Ludgrove specifically for their reputations for nurturing environments. But enrollment was only the beginning. She maintained close communication with teachers, attended every school event she possibly could, and sent personal handwritten notes to staff expressing genuine appreciation. Several of those notes would later surface in public auctions, small paper testaments to a mother who never treated any gesture of care as too minor to acknowledge. When the formal separation from Charles was announced in 1992, the task of co-parenting under an unforgiving public spotlight intensified. William was 10, Harry was 8. Diana's response was not to retreat. It was to become, if anything, even more present. She structured her days around their routines, prioritized their emotional stability above her own considerable personal difficulties, and continued showing up, again and again, in the quiet and ordinary ways that matter most to children. In November 1995, Diana sat before journalist Martin Bashir for what would become one of the most watched television interviews in British history. Over 22 million people tuned in. The world saw a woman speaking with painful honesty about isolation, betrayal, and the toll of royal life. But even in that extraordinary moment, Diana's central concern were her boys. She spoke about wanting them to grow into men of genuine emotional intelligence, not simply trained in the mechanics of royal duty, but capable of truly understanding other people. The consequences of that interview were swift. Queen Elizabeth II wrote to both Diana and Charles, urging them to move forward with a formal divorce. According to those close to Diana at the time, including her former butler, Paul Burrell, she was deeply shaken. She had not anticipated the finality of the response. She had hoped for more time, more room to find her footing. But the process moved forward without pause. The divorce was finalized on August 28, 1996. With it came the removal of her formal title of Her Royal Highness, a change that, while procedural on paper, carried enormous personal weight for Diana. It meant that protocol now required her to curtsy to her former husband, to senior royals, and eventually to her own sons. Paul Burrell later recounted how Diana confided this particular anguish to William. The 14-year-old prince, hearing his mother's distress, offered her words that have since become among the most quoted in discussions of their relationship. He reportedly told her not to worry, that when he became king, he would give the title back to her. Whether or not those exact words were spoken, the story endures because it captures something true about who they were to each other. Freed from the constraints of formal royal life, Diana turned her full energy towards the causes she had long cared about most. She stepped back from over 100 royal patronages, choosing instead to focus deeply on a small number of issues: homelessness, HIV and AIDS awareness, the campaign against landmines, and children's health care. She was no longer operating as a representative of the monarchy, she was operating as herself. In January 1997, she traveled to Angola with the International Red Cross, walking through partially cleared minefields in protective gear. The images that emerged from that trip were some of the most arresting photographs taken of her in her final years. A princess in a hard hat, surrounded by devastation, refusing to look away. It was exactly the kind of courageous, human act that had defined her public life. Through it all, William and Harry remained at the center. She organized her schedule around theirs. She continued writing letters to friends, to staff, to supporters, and in nearly every one, her sons appeared. She wrote about William's growing thoughtfulness, about Harry's irrepressible energy, about her hopes and her quiet fears for the futures they would navigate. She told William in various ways and on various occasions to use whatever platform life gave him in service of those who had no platform of their own. She wanted him to understand leadership not as authority, but as responsibility. Tragically, she never lived to see how fully he absorbed that lesson. On August 31st, 1997, Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. She was 37 years old. The images of William and Harry, 15 and 12 respectively, walking in solemn procession behind their mother's coffin, are among the most haunting in modern memory. Yet, even in her absence, perhaps especially in her absence, Diana's influence on her sons remained impossible to miss. What do you think about the remarkable contents of Princess Diana's letter to Prince William? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video meaningful, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps us continue telling stories like this one.